When I was 19, I came home from college to stay with my mom for the summer. She had recently divorced my stepfather and had moved from a house to a ground-level apartment. One day, I was sitting on the toilet, peeing, if you wanted to know, and I saw a light coming through the vent on the floor. Looking closer, I saw two brown eyes staring up at me. I screamed, threw a towel on the vent, and ran to tell my mom and boyfriend what had happened. They initially thought I was kidding, until they realized I was genuinely freaked out. This particular complex had these weird locked crawl space type access points. The police found that the vents had been pried open, but they never found who did it. I'm assuming a maintenance worker. Needless to say, my mom moved out quickly. After that experience, I always, to this day, check vents, floor, or ceiling. This happened over 20 years ago, but it still really creeps me out. Update. I've had a few days to reflect upon this post. You know, as creepy as that event was, I had another situation arise a few years ago. In 2007, I learned that the prominent psychologist that I worked for in Seattle in the early 90s committed suicide after it was discovered that he was filming his clients and employees in the bathroom of his office. He was arrested, lost his license, then offed himself. It turns out he hid his camera in one of those Airwick automatic air freshener units. The guy was a real ass. I quit the job because he was a lecherous, condescending ass. This was around 1993, and I wonder if there were any tiny cameras back then, and if he was filming all the 20-something females whom worked for him. So disturbing how many awful people there are in this world. This happened about 4 years ago when I was in 4th grade, so I was about 9 or 10 at the time, and I went to this little public school, which I won't name. I lived in a quiet town where everybody knew everybody, a peaceful town, a place you wouldn't expect a rapist to live anyways. I don't know if they do this at other public schools, but at my school there was a thing called Morning Sing, where kids would sing to a certain song on the board. I didn't like loud noises because they hurt my ears, and I would always sit outside and read books. On this day, I was reading one of the Harry Potter books, and I think it was The Half-Blood Prince. I may be wrong. So I was reading when I heard a voice of someone saying,
"Hey, come here."
I ignored it, thinking it was a conversation two other people were having, so I went back to reading my book. Then, I saw an old man and thought to myself, he's probably just walking. Then, I saw him start to cross the street and I started to get up and knock on the door so someone would let me in, because these doors had an automatic lock, so when you went out, someone had to let you back in. Then, he said the words that I can remember to this day.
"Don't be afraid. I haven't seen a little boy in so long."
That was my breaking point. I was banging on this door as hard as I could, and the old man started to run faster than any old man I've seen when my teacher opened the door. Now, this teacher was a great teacher. Nice, dependable, and strong. He was even nicknamed after the wrestler, Mr. T. I told him what happened and what the creep did, and he ran after him and tackled him to the ground. The authorities arrived soon after and arrested the man. He's now no longer allowed around children or schools, and I have a restraining order against him, so even as an adult, he can't try to have his way with me. Mr. T, if you're reading this, we should talk sometime. But creepy old guy, let's not meet. This happened last Friday morning, and I'm not really sure what to think of it, but it's creeped me out enough to want to put it here. It had just turned 9 a.m., and I was sitting in my living room with my 2 young kids having a coffee. My house is the last house on the street, and while there is a field behind my house, it's very rare to see people walk by. You get the occasional dog walker, but that's about it. So I'm sitting in my living room that looks out into my front garden, and a man walks by wearing dark trousers and a high coat. He's looking in at my house, and I see him looking at all my windows and up towards the roof as he passes by. I'm thinking that it's a bit weird, but don't think much more of it. About a minute or so later, he comes by again, only this time he walks into my garden. My house is detached, so you can walk the whole way around it. He walked up the path and around the side of my house where the garage is. I went into the kitchen and could hear him opening my side gate, and then he walked back into my garden, looking up at the windows and the garage roof. The garage is attached to the kitchen. Now, I have mild anxiety, and even though it's 9 a.m. in a suburban area, this guy freaked me out. I'm home alone with 2 kids and there's a random man in my garden. I was a bit weirded out by him. Also, I was still in my PJs as we were having a lazy morning watching DVDs, so I felt quite vulnerable too. I unlocked my back door, and as I opened it, he said,
"It's all right."
And I said, "You're in my garden and I don't know who you are." And he replied,
"I'm with NIE, Northern Ireland Electricity."
At this point, it's worth mentioning that we don't even use NIE as our electricity supplier. At that, I simply closed and locked the door and went back into the living room and phoned my husband, who was at work, to tell him about what happened and that I was a little freaked out. He urged me to phone and complain that this guy didn't come to the door and show me ID before walking around our property and checking the house. I did just that. At first, they were apologetic but couldn't find any trace in the system of one of their guys being in my area. The girl told me she'd pass my complaint on to her superiors, who would be better able to do a search of the workers in the area. I got a call from them this afternoon, and after thorough research, they have no records of workers or vans in my area. And since I never asked for ID, he didn't volunteer ID, and they have no record of anyone from their company being in my area, they have concluded that this man was not one of their workers. So I don't know who he was or why he was walking around my property checking it out, but he wasn't from the electricity company he said he was with. This happened back in October of 2015 when I was 23 years old. I should point out I'm 5'0" and look about as tough as a marshmallow rabbit. I worked the night shift at a sandwich shop, and to go home I'd take the metro one stop over, and it'd be a straight 4-block walk home. On this particular night, it was raining pretty hard, enough so that I had my hood up and it obscured my face fairly well. So to clarify, I'm wearing a black hoodie at 11 o'clock at night. I'm getting ready to cross the street at the CVS when I see someone jogging down the sidewalk from the direction of the Gold's Gym from further up the road. I crossed the street and headed to my apartment. I got home, locked both my locks, and fell asleep almost immediately. Later the next afternoon, on my day off, I headed over to the CVS to purchase some stuff. I'm in the self-checkout line, and there's a guy, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, dressed in a business suit right next to me. I have no clue who he is, nor do I particularly care. As I glance over briefly for no particular reason, he makes eye contact with me and says,
"Nice to see you again. How are you doing?"
What?
"I saw you last night when I was heading back from the gym."
Then it dawned on me that he's the guy I saw briefly on my way home the night before, but several things immediately didn't sit right with me. First, he was too far away for me to see the details of his face, which led me to believe I was too far away for him to see the details of mine. That being said, I had my hood up, in the rain, and close to the pitch darkness. How could he have possibly recognized me, unless he had seen me before last night? And what were the chances that we happened to be at the checkout at the same time? The man introduced himself, and he handed me his business card, which I took because I was at a loss for what else to do. He starts talking to me like we were old friends catching up. I didn't want to be rude or possibly make him angry, so I reluctantly told him my first name, but when he asked if I lived nearby, I shook my head and gestured in the complete opposite direction. We leave the store and start crossing the street, and he said he didn't mind giving me a ride next time so that I don't have to get caught in the rain. I made as though I was leaving in the opposite direction and waited for him to cross several streets before racing back to my apartment. The next night on my walk home, my head was swiveling around like an owl, keeping an eye out for him. But fortunately, I didn't encounter him again until the following February. I'm walking home, cold as fuck, even though I'm dressed like an Eskimo. I have my headphones in, and I'm listening to Blink-182's song, Feeling This, and I mutter sarcastically to myself, I'm definitely feeling the wind right now. And I see someone standing across the street. I heard the person call out,
Hi, Maria.
I looked over and see that it's the same guy from the CVS, and he makes like he wants to talk to me. I immediately crank up the volume on my headphones and act as though I couldn't hear him. He seemed to change his mind and walked off with a wave. I booked it home and locked my doors, and fortunately have never seen him again, but that may be because I eventually moved to a different part of DC. Here's a picture of the business card he gave me. I've tried looking it up and have found next to nothing. Maybe one of your listeners with super tech-savvy skills can find out something about him that I can't. I was around 16 years old when this happened to me. It was just me and my dad at our house, and since he was a businessman that traveled frequently, I was left home alone quite often. First of all, I'm going to do my best to describe to you the layout of my house so you can better understand my situation. My house is pretty small, since it's just my father, my dog, and me living in it. There's a long hallway full of full-size windows separating my dad's room and mine. Our dog loved to look out the windows, so we always kept them open enough for her to look out. I'm the last room at the end of the hallway. In between the two rooms is my bathroom and a spare room. All the rest is irrelevant. Let's get to it. It was around 11 p.m. when the worst night of my life began. My dad was passed out in the bed after a long day, and I was mindlessly dancing around my house getting ready for bed. I hopped in my shower, not knowing what was coming ahead, and of course, like the cringe-worthy horror movie, my dog starts aggressively barking up a storm. With my excessive knowledge of how it turns out for the girl in the movies, I go out to explore. I head to my room to throw some clothes on while my dog is still shitting a brick. Months before, I'm not sure how I managed to break my door handle, but you don't have to twist the knob to open it. All it needs is a small push. Scared shitless, I barely managed to put a shirt on when my dog opened the door. I looked to see her enter my room while in the midst of barking, and that's when I saw it. There's only one window that has vision to the opening of my room, and in the corner of it, I saw a face. A face so seemingly sinister that I can still see it years after. It was dark, so I took a second to comprehend what I just saw, but when I finally realized it, I screamed. My dad owns lots of guns, so when he heard me scream bloody murder, he ran out with a pistol. He asked me what happened, and I could barely mutter what I saw. He ran outside to see if the man with the terrifying face was still near. We stood out there for a minute scanning the area. A man was casually strolling towards us from the opposite direction from about 100 yards away. I knew it was him. I got that feeling in my stomach that you can't mistake. It was like he was trying to cover up that he was there by coming from a different direction. That bastard didn't fool me.
You better stay the fuck away from my daughter. You see what I have here? You know what this does?
Holding up his gun, I could have sworn my dad was going to shoot. The man brushed these threats off easily.
Fuck off, old man,
he said. My dad and I went back inside. He went back to bed like nothing had happened, but I could not sleep a wink. I kept thinking he was going to come back and hurt me because of the threats we said to him. We called the cops the next morning. They came and scoped out our house. He looked around the house trying to calm me down, but I was still pretty shaken up. He went to the front yard, and that's when he saw it. In the front windows in the long hallway, there were small bushes, nothing much. The cop, from outside, went to the window that had a view of my room, and there it was. If he tried to tell me the news without making me more upset, he failed. There were indents in the dirt right in front of the window. The cop said,
He knew where he needed to look for you, and it seems as if he had come here more than once because of the broken pieces of bush and the divots in the ground.
Turns out, he was the nephew of my old neighbor, and he had been staying there for months. Never arrested, never got in trouble, probably barely got a slap on the wrists, but at least he was gone now. How long had he been watching me? I'll never know. All I know is I keep my door shut, and I never keep the blinds open. So creepy nephew that had watched me for who knows how long, let's not meet. This is a story that took place over the period of 1 year, taking place before and after I moved in with some friends. The first instance of the person we began to refer to as the Goat Man was, ironically, on Halloween. I had made plans that got canceled that evening, so I went to hang out with some friends and engage in debauchery as all young adults do from time to time. One of them mentioned that a friend of theirs was coming over and joining us. I got there around 8:30. Kids were thinning out a bit as this is a smaller town, and the parents were pretty wary here. A few of us were in the dining room talking, and the rest were in the other room engaging in said debauchery. A person came to the door and asked if one of us was home. They were, of course, told yes and invited in. None of us in the dining room knew the person, but we are friendly enough and included him in the conversation. As the evening went on, he joined us and went into the other room with the rest of my friends. We did the things we had planned, drank and smoked late into the evening. He eventually left. After he left, we all realized that not a single one of us knew the person well enough to say so. We all assumed one of us knew him. I had assumed he was my friend's buddy that was coming over. I had crashed there, and the next morning I asked who the guy was. Well, it turns out he was a guy that came over with another friend of ours, briefly, for less than an hour. I will repeat, this was a person none of us even knew. He just came over and asked if one of us was here. That's not even the creepiest part. We dubbed him the Goat Man because of the fact he sort of just showed up and became part of our group, and left without anyone really knowing it. A few months later, he showed up again to hang out with us. At this time, a couple of new people had moved in with us. These people let him in after he asked for another one of us. We were surprised. No one had any prior knowledge of his coming over. He just showed up, again. We asked him to text one of us before coming over. We're friendly, but not that friendly. He left and he said he would, and he did. Usually right before he would show up on our doorstep. We didn't think anything malicious of this guy, just that he was awkward and an idiot. I mean, is your first reaction that the person who you don't know is going to skin you and wear your skin as a suit? Of course not, but maybe it should have been in this situation. Eventually, we had a common occurrence of him showing up once or twice a week, and us asking him to text us before showing up, he never did. We got sick of that really fast. One day, he comes over and knocks. Another one of my roommates goes outside and talks to him a bit. He begins to tell a story about breaking into a person's house and stealing $400 worth of electronics because they undersold him pot for about $5. They made a mistake and they were going to rectify it that weekend. We actually knew these people. He didn't know that. After he leaves, our roommate comes back in and tells us all of this. Well, of course we banned him. This is not the kind of person you welcome back into your home. Well, a couple of weeks go by and he turns up again. This time after smoking a cigarette on our porch for about 10 minutes. He would smoke on our porch. People would come home and find him there. So we told him not to come back, and if he did, the police would be involved. Here's where things go from 0 to 100. About 3 weeks later, one of us comes upstairs and tells us our porch is on fire. It left a sizable hole in our porch. We have very little evidence that it was him, but given how malicious he acted towards our other friends, we figured he would do something like that. And there was the fact that he smoked on our porch while no one was home, all the time. We put out the, thankfully, small fire and returned to business as usual. I saw him about a month later. He smiled real big and greeted me like a friend, just like nothing had happened between us. Since then, we haven't seen him. For about 3 months, we were worried he would break in. Thankfully, this never occurred. He was an odd fellow, that Goat Man. slightly dangerous, and over-interested in hanging out with us. I don't know if our friends reported the break-in, but I hope they did. Was going to no-sleep this until I realized that was a fictional sub. This is an actual experience that makes me peep out of my kitchen blinds every morning before turning on the light. Cut to the encounter. It's dawn, so still a little dark even though all of the blinds are open in the kitchen. I flip on the light and start feeding the cats as usual. Through the glare on the window, I think I see someone in my backyard, which wouldn't be unheard of as the older lady rents the guest house behind me. She has her own fenced area though. I get closer and lose my breath as a scraggly middle-aged stranger is in a robe in my backyard, staring at me. He's standing perfectly still and doesn't look away, which immediately struck me with a, oh shit, I'm in a horror movie feeling. I stared back for a bit and realized he was looking at the house, not me. I rationalized thinking maybe he's the older lady's overnight guest and got confused about her living arrangement. Maybe he thinks I'm an intruder? So I step out back and give him a, "Good morning, how you doing?" as I walk up and try to determine his eye line. He answers back normally, as if nothing about his situation is weird. Note, he has not made eye contact. He is still staring at the house. I then voice the classic passive-aggressive suburbia threat. "Can I help you?"
I'm your neighbor. I think my kid's toy is on your roof.
Two things. I know my neighbors. He was not familiar. Also, what kid lands a toy on the roof at this hour? I tell him I'll go up and check after work, kind of shooing him out. He doesn't move, just keeps staring. I repeat, "I'll check after work. You can go. Which house are you? I'll leave it at your door. What is it?" He's silent for a moment as I grow more irritated at his lack of response, and more creeped out. Finally he replies,
Oh, I'm just a couple houses that way.
He lackadaisically points in no discernible direction. I say okay and again ask what his kid lost. He speaks again.
Really, I could get it if I could come in and go out that window.
He points up at an attic vent. No, that's not really a window. I promise I'll check later. Have a good day. Again, trying to politely shoo him. I've now edged myself over to a loose board from my firewood pile that I could use as a weapon. He continues to stare at the house. His eyes haven't moved yet. I pick up the board and pretend I'm moving it to a table behind him, so I can put him between myself and the fence gate, his hopeful exit. As I'm doing that, he breaks the trance and walks towards my back door. I'm pretty much done with niceties at this point. I run up to block him, board in hand, and deliver the weakest intimidation speech ever. Look, man, I don't know who you are, but I'm sorry. Maybe I don't remember you. It's early, but I can't let you in my house. Please, I'll look on the roof later. He raises up his hand as if to say, no, I don't mean any harm, and tries to put it on my shoulder. I sidestep and put a few feet between us. He speaks again, in a dazed tone.
I'm sorry. Maybe if I could just use your ladder, I can get up there.
I get a little more confrontational and raise the board to show it. Not cocked, but visible. Dude, I said I'd look later. Please leave. I have to get ready for work. He turns, saunters, and looks at the house again, now back to his original spot, in a trance again. Please leave! My yell rolls off him. He isn't even listening, but after a yawn, he does casually make his way back down the side of the house. At this point, I dart back inside and watch him from the windows, cell phone at the ready. He leaves and shuts the gate behind him effortlessly, which, by the way, is hard to do. My friends still haven't mastered the lift and pull gate locking move. I asked around and no one knew who this guy was based on my description, and no one has seen him since. I would say he was mentally ill, maybe homeless and passing through, but he seemed too clean-cut, scraggly but not dirty. I still don't know what to make of it. It was just so bizarre how he paid so little mind to trespassing and being told to leave. And no, there was no toy on my roof or in my yard. Before I tell my story, I just want to say that this world we live in is a world of endless possibilities. It could be that the young man I encountered was really a dark entity. But for the purpose of this post, I am going to take things from a rational perspective. I will attempt to tell the story as down to earth as possible. That way, you can draw conclusions for yourselves. Now, I will continue with the story. One time, I met this guy in my poetry class. We will call him Wayland to protect his privacy. Wayland and I became pretty close because we were always put into critique groups together in our class. I talked to him, and he seemed like a pretty normal guy. I went to his apartment a few times to hang out or play video games. He was obsessed with his dog, so whenever we'd go anywhere, he'd usually take his dog with him. That was the only strange thing about his personality that I could see. But eventually he started talking about this girl named Michelle, who was an angel he was trying to find. At first I thought he was talking about a girl who was like an angel, but no. He was looking for someone he loved, who he literally believed was an angel. And that was the first weird thing I noticed about him. But I tried to keep an open mind, as a lot of paranormal stuff has happened to me in my life. A few months into our friendship, he ended up taking me out to this lake, and we walked along the shore. It was the one time he didn't bring his dog. For some reason, the entire trip I was getting this really bad vibe. Like I needed to get out of there. So as we are walking along the beach, he tells me this story about how he is a demon. Or he used to be, until he was incarnated into his current form. Just to clarify, I do not personally believe that this individual was a demon. I think he was just a seriously disturbed young man. But I am recounting things as he told them to me, so you can get a better idea of what took place. He told this story about a doll that used to levitate and do weird things in his mom's attic or something, and how the doll used to move on its own and talk to him. Apparently, the doll told him who to be angry at and who he should hurt if they got on his bad side, among other creepy things. At this point, I was royally freaked out. I told him that his story was interesting and I wish I could listen more, but my mom called and I needed to get home. He just gave me this confused look and then said that he would take me back to my house. Fortunately, he did take me home, and after that day, I avoided him in class and wouldn't hang out with him after school. I always made excuses like I needed to do homework or something. And that is when he started calling me 50 times a day, leaving hundreds of messages on my phone. He even showed up at my job a few times to talk to me. The creepy thing about this is that I never told him where I worked. I was polite each time, but didn't encourage him too much. He would show up other places I went to, coincidentally, but I knew they weren't coincidence. So yeah, he was pretty much hardcore creeping, and it was pretty scary. After I avoided him for a while, he eventually got the hint that I didn't want him around and left me alone. But then, a few weeks later, I found out that my friend was dating him. He had never met my friend before, and he claimed that he just happened to find her on a dating site. I truly believe he looked into who my friends were so he could latch onto them and keep an eye on me. It was basically another way for him to stalk me. I tried to tell my friend not to get too involved because of his weird behavior. I mentioned that he called me 50 times and left a whole bunch of creepy messages on my phone, left creepy texts, but she just thought I was being paranoid, and she went out with him anyway. Fortunately, she got a bad vibe from him after a few dates and broke up with him. He also started calling her a bunch of times, but eventually gave up when it looked like she wouldn't change her mind. A few weeks after the incident, I woke up to the sound of someone walking outside of my bedroom window. It was a bit unnerving, but I figured that it might be one of the neighbors, so I didn't think anything of it, and I went back to bed. I investigated the area outside of my window the next day and saw distinct footprints and something that looked like a knife left by the footprints. By that time, my poetry class was over, and I really had no other contact with Wayland, so I didn't know if he lived in the same place. But I let my mom know, and we kept a watch out for a couple of weeks. But that was the last time I was bothered by anything like that. I don't know where Wayland is these days, or if it was him outside of my window that night, but I hope that we never meet again. I wasn't going to put this story online because it happened to me this year and it still really bothers me. I changed my mind because I want Reddit to know to always trust your first instincts, no matter who the person is. I had been unemployed for 6 months, desperate for work, willing to do anything to get a good job. I remember me, my boyfriend, and his 2 other mates were at the casino. There's only one in our whole state. After watching our mate spend all his money on blackjack, we were ready to leave. Having a cigarette on the balcony, a bald man came up to us and started a conversation. He bought us a round of drinks and started bragging about all the businesses he owned. He looked about 39. He was a bit weird, but he was buying us all drinks that we could not afford, so we really didn't care. After he found out I was unemployed, he jumped at the chance to offer me a job, giving me his card and booking an appointment for a trial on Monday. Thinking he was a professional businessman at the time, I was thrilled at the idea of finally getting work. For once, I thought I had some good luck and did not want to ruin my chances for the job by being too fucked up in front of him. He then started telling me he had the penthouse suite of the casino equipped with a spa and proper bar and invited me and our mates to go up there later to drink. We said we'd think about it, and he went to the bar and came back with a round of drinks for us again. At this point, me, my boyfriend, and his mates were pondering whether we should take him up on his invitation to the penthouse he said he had. While I go outside for another cigarette, he follows me and asked me if I want to make $100 cash. Doing what?
Just come with me to the front desk so I can book the suite.
I thought you already had it. I'll just get the guys.
Get them after. No, I said I only booked it. I just want some company at the desk.
The desk wasn't far enough for any trouble to go down, and I didn't want to anger my future boss. So I agreed, waited while he bought a suite, collected the money, and walked briskly back to where my boyfriend was and told him what had happened. 2 hours later, all of us are up in his suite drinking when he keeps making up bullshit stories about how he used to date runway models. All we could do was nod and not seem rude. He then asked us how our drinks tasted, and we said, fine, why? Then he told us he put some crack in them to keep us up all night. THC, MDMA, DMT, and acid are the only drugs I dabble in. Never crack. So naturally, we were all fucking pissed he had drugged us. 1, we had only just met that night. 2, he was well over 35. It's fucking gross. 3, I was going to apply for the home open job Monday. That's around the time he took me and my boyfriend away and asked us for a threesome. We said no, and he just started talking about himself again. By that time, he finally let us leave. He wasn't shutting the fuck up no matter what excuse we came up with. I found myself vomiting at 4 a.m. at the train station, surrounded by drunk, aggressive aboriginals, feeling like I was going to die from whatever he had slipped us. He called me the next morning, apologizing for his behavior, and booked a time to meet him at the job interview. My boyfriend had a bad feeling about him and told me not to go. But in all our financial strife, the job sounded amazing, so I decided to give it a try. The job was supposed to be me handing out pamphlets at home opens. I couldn't find the address he wanted me to find, so he told me to meet him at a nearby shopping center, where he got me to jump in his car and he took me to the display home. We got into the house and he started talking about the other night at the casino. I asked him to keep it professional, and that's when he turned scary.
I bet you really wanted that threesome, eh? Come look at this porno site. You look so sexy right now, getting my dick so hard.
I felt sick and horrified at this point. I knew I was by myself, with a stranger in a display home, in a display village, where nobody lives, no one in sight. A stranger who kept telling me all these gross sadistic things he wanted me to do. That's inappropriate. I have a boyfriend. I want to go home. This has made me too uncomfortable. Fuck your job, take me back to my car. He looked angry and started trying to convince me to touch him and started chasing me around the dinner table laughing. Not happy laughing either. My boyfriend called, and so I ran outside, lit a cigarette, and stayed there until he came out. He dropped me off at my car, and I asked for my resume back, but he said he wants to keep it. I didn't feel like arguing, so I just left. I told my boyfriend what happened, and he sent an email to the head of the guy's company, asking if my interview was actually legit, and telling him what happened. Turns out, it wasn't. Never trust anyone until you're certain of their credibility. A month later, I received a call from him. He screamed down the phone that he was going to kill me, my boyfriend, and my family for emailing his boss. He told us that bookies were on their way, and we were fucked. He probably got my address from the resume, but the bookies never came. For ages, I felt miserable. The only job I was excited for ended up getting me drugged and almost raped. So this happened last summer, 2016, when I was waiting for a friend to come over to my apartment. I didn't have a working cell phone, so I hadn't actually set up my buzzer yet. When people wanted to come over, I had to wait for them to message me so I could go run down to let them into the building. This friend didn't have a cell phone either, though, so we had to do it the old-fashioned way, and we estimated how much time it would take for him to arrive, and I would wait outside and watch for his car. I don't remember the time exactly. I think it was around 4 p.m. that he said he would show up, but it was still really bright outside as it was the middle of summer. Sorry if you were expecting a creepy middle-of-the-night type story. I know. Bummer. I decided I would go outside early just to make sure I was there in case he overestimated how much time it would take for him to show up. I lived in a large apartment building, 10 floors if I recall, with a second matching apartment that mirrored mine across the lot. I lived on a busy street, with a little strip mall just down the road and a Tim Hortons across from that. I'm thankful I lived in such a busy area. Had it have been anywhere more discreet, I might not have this opportunity to share my story. I don't know if I can do a good enough job describing the area. By the stop sign, there is a wall with angled ends pointed towards the building, and some bushes, trees between the wall and the road. The road that the Tim Hortons is on is the busy road that I mentioned earlier, and the road my building is on with the stop sign is a small side street that turns into a dirt road, with lots of construction behind the trees at the back of my parking lot. I apologize if none of that made sense, but what you need to take from that is that the side street is quiet, dirt road, unused by regular commuters, and only used by construction vehicles. It was rare to ever see a regular car driving there. There was no need for anyone to ever use that road. So I go outside and stand by the stop sign and light up a smoke while I wait for my buddy, and a couple of drags in, I notice a car coming around the corner behind the trees at the back of the lot. The car drove around the corner at a normal speed, but began to slow down once he got closer to my building. Some red flags went up, but I shrugged it off as nothing and told myself I was being absurd. It was the middle of the day, and the driver probably slowed down because he's looking for an address or something. By the time he was passing me, he was doing under 10 km, roughly 6 miles per hour, and was staring me down. I made eye contact with this guy, and most people when caught staring at someone look down or away embarrassed that they were caught staring, but not this guy. He just looked me dead in the eyes and continued driving past. I was pretty uncomfortable with this, mainly because I was standing so close to the road, so as he drove past, we were able to get a good look at each other. If it weren't for him being inside of a vehicle, he could have reached out and touched me. Now, because he was so close, I was able to get a good look at him, and this also gave me the creeps. His appearance set up even more red flags. If you've ever seen Ederum, he looked a lot like him. Also, he drove what I believe was a 1992 Volvo 960, and it didn't exactly do him any favors either. The car kind of screamed, "I'm going to make a lampshade out of your skin." The reason I think I know the exact car he drove is because he passed by enough times that I have the image of the Volvo symbol and the diagonal line across the grille of the car burned into my mind. After this happened, I spent hours with my partner on Google Images trying to find the car I thought he drove. At first, I thought it was a Buick. But I digress. After he drove past me, he turned right and headed towards the Tim Hortons. Once he passed my building, he was out of sight and I assumed that would be the last of him. A couple minutes later, I hear tires on gravel in the distance and see a vehicle headed my way behind the trees. And who do you think comes rolling around the corner? Him. By now, I'm regretting my decision to come out and wait for my friend early, but I figured he would be showing up any minute now, so there was no point in going inside. So, creepy guy is headed towards me again, and this time, he's driving even slower. When he passes me, I try not to make eye contact, but I can't help it. I feel his eyes on me and I have to look. When I meet his gaze, he waves slowly like the Queen and speeds off, turning right again. I'm even more creeped out at this point, but I am still trying to play devil's advocate. I assume he's just mistaken me for someone he knows and shrug it off again. I light up another smoke while I'm waiting to try to calm myself down, and here comes Creepo again around the corner. This time, I tell myself that if he doesn't either turn into the parking lot, stop and ask for directions, or turn left when he passes me, that he's either crazy or actually has bad intentions. When he finally passes me, he's slowed down to under 5 km, or 3 miles per hour, and he just smiles at me. His smile sent the biggest chill down my spine in broad daylight, close to a busy road, next to a large apartment building packed full of people. It sent a chill down my spine. The rest of the red flags went up. Alarms started blaring, lights flashing. Everything in my body was screaming at me to get the fuck away from this guy. I moved a bit further away from the road and the stop sign so that if he were to try something, I'd be closer to my building and might have an easier time getting away. I also continued to tell myself that I was crazy and ignore my intuition. I figured he was a senile elderly person who may not be in their right mind, or he was really, really lost and a tad socially retarded. Either way, I told myself there was no way he'd be coming around the corner for a 4th time. I was wrong. He came around the corner 2 or 3 more times after that too, each time staring me down with his overly creepy smile, not once stopping to speak to me or make an attempt to pull over, always just doing a slow crawl by and staring me down. I waited for him to pass me once more, and when he was out of sight, I ran to the other side of the wall and hid behind the angled part and the trees. The wall was a tall concrete one, and the trees also helped me to hide from the road while I peeked around them to watch for the Volvo. This way, I figured when he came around the corner, he'd see that I was gone from the stop sign and just move on with his day. I had enough time to see him coming and move behind the wall back to the stop sign as he passed so he wouldn't see me in my new hiding place. What really creeps me out the most is that when he was passing by that time, He let his car slow down to the point of it barely moving. You know when you begin to take your foot off the clutch and your car starts rolling? Or how in an automatic, the second you take your foot off the brake, the car will roll forward really slowly? He slowed down to that point, and I watched him from where I hid as he looked around to see where I went. He didn't come back after, which only adds credence to the fact that whatever his reason was for circling my building so many times had something to do with me. I have no idea what his intentions were, but I'm glad it was the middle of the day and I was next to a busy street. So, Edarem number 2, let's not meet. I worked as a Walmart cashier for a little over a year. I quit in August of 2015 when I went away to college. As a cashier, you see a lot of people in a day, especially at Walmart. And after a while, you don't even see people's faces when you look at them. But there are some people you see so often you start to recognize and sometimes learn their names. There was this one guy, always in the same Green Bay Packers hoodie and Chicago Cubs baseball cap, that would often seek out my line no matter how long it was, just so he could stare at me and rarely say a word. Whenever he did say anything to me, he would always lean across the register to get closer to my face. He always gave me a really bad vibe, but when I asked the other cashiers about him, they said that he had never been weird around them. One of the girls even said that he was a close family friend. After that, I dropped the issue. One night, after I'd been there about a year, I was working a 2 to 11 shift. Those shifts were always the worst because you would be there for 3, sometimes 4, front-end managers or CSMs. But also, it takes the chunk out of your day where you can actually do anything. So I am down on the self-checkout, and it's about 10:15, so I'm counting the minutes until I can shut it down at 10 till 11. The creepy guy comes in the front door and makes a beeline for me at the self-checkout podium. When I see him come in, I instantly get nervous. He walks up and says,
"Can I still buy a phone card in electronics?"
I told him I only worked as a cashier on the front end, so I didn't know anything about electronics, but he could go back and check. He seemed peeved by this answer, but walked away without another word. About 10 minutes later, he comes up with a prepaid phone card and says there's no one at the register in electronics. So I activate his card and hand it to him, telling him to have a good night, but he pushes the card back at me without saying a word, and I say, "Is something wrong?" To which he replies,
"These minutes aren't on my phone yet, are they?"
I was confused by the statement because of course they weren't, he had just bought the card. I shook my head and he waved the card in front of my face.
"Why the fuck are you just standing there? Reactivate my phone."
When he talked, he was so close I could smell his breath, and I was scared. I wanted to put a call into a CSM so that someone would come down and help me. This is where I should probably mention that I am about 5 feet 3 inches tall, and he is closer to probably 6 feet 5 inches tall, and very stocky, so he was towering over me, and the thought that he could easily overpower me crossed my mind. But I get so nervous whenever men yell or cuss at me, because my dad was never the type to yell or cuss. I took the card out of his hand, and he slammed his cell phone on the scanner. I was trying not to let him know that I was nervous, but I was terrified. I knew that I had never put minutes on a prepaid phone before, but I didn't dare tell him that, in fear of what he might do. So I read the directions, picked up his phone, dialed the number, and as I'm putting in the card number, his phone runs out of minutes. I try to call back and I get an error message. I'm at a loss. I meekly hand his phone back to him and say, "I'm sorry. Something went wrong. I don't know what's happening." As soon as I say it, He takes his phone, opens it up, tries to dial someone, and when it doesn't work, he looks at me with furious eyes. He screams,
"What the fuck did you do to my phone? What the fuck?"
His voice is echoing in the store, and unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the end of second shift rush yet, so there is no one around. He closes his phone and opens it again, trying to make another call, but when it doesn't work, he throws the phone down on the scanner again. He says,
"I don't know what you did to my phone, but you better fucking fix it."
But this comes much more quietly, practically a whisper. At this point, I'm worried he's going to put his hands on me, and I don't know what to do. I put in a call for a CSM for my register, and then I say, "I've called someone that might be able to help, but we're at a shift change right now, so it might be faster for you to go to the customer service desk." He picks up his phone off the podium, still mumbling under his breath that I fucked up his phone, and I'm hoping I can get out before he comes back, or at least have someone else down at the self-check with me. Another 15 minutes go by, and I don't see him again. As I'm picking up items that people left by the registers, getting ready to shut them down for the night, he comes back and stands by the podium. He still looks completely pissed off, and my stomach sank. He made that finger motion that means come here without saying anything, and for some reason, that makes me even more nervous. When I am standing in front of him, he leans so close to my face that I think he's about to kiss me or bite me or God knows what. I try to take a step back, but he takes a step forward when I do. A creepy grin comes across his face as he says,
"The girl up there fixed it. Simple fix. But next time, I expect you to know what to do. Understand?"
I nod because I don't think I can speak. He gets impossibly closer before saying,
"I'm sorry I raised my voice. I never should have done that, especially to a pretty girl like you."
When he adds the last part, he lightly uses his fingertips to brush my bangs to the side. I took a step back and he said,
"Let me make it up to you. Let me buy you a drink."
I shake my head. I say, "No, thank you. I'm only 19. He says,
"So we'll get a couple of beers and go back to my place."
Again, I shake my head. "No, really, it's okay. I'm not much of a drinker. I have an early morning tomorrow." He looks displeased with this answer and says,
"Tell you what, I'll wait over here by the door, just in case you change your mind."
I smile at him weakly and tell him to have a good night. When I see him walk through the security things, I quickly shut down the registers and sign out of mine. Then I run over to find a CSM to tell about the whole thing. The third shift CSM that I tell looks at me like I'm lying, and when I'm finished says, "I know him. He wouldn't hurt a fly. He doesn't have it in him. You're just being dramatic." She then turns to another older cashier behind her, shakes her head and mumbles, "Ugh, teenagers." I ask if I can have someone walk me to my car, and they tell me that management is in a meeting and the security guy went home already. So I clocked out and went to the bathroom. I waited in the bathroom for about 10 minutes before coming out and attempting to go to my car. When I walked around the corner through the security things, he wasn't sitting on the bench right there like I had been expecting. I relaxed a little before I realized he was standing just outside the door, far enough away to keep it from closing, smoking a cigarette. He had his back turned to the door, though. Luckily, I never went out the front doors. I always went down the corridor and out the side door. I quietly closed the door behind me so maybe I wouldn't catch his attention. I rushed to my car, which was, fortunately, very close to the building. As I'm quickly walking to my car, I hear him shout,
"Hey, why are you avoiding me? Come here."
At this point, I take off into a full-on sprint. which is not easy because I'm wearing Sperry's, so it's like running in clogs. I get to my car, get in, lock the doors as I'm starting it, and don't even bother with my seatbelt. By that point, he had made it almost all the way to my car and was still yelling, telling me he just wanted to talk. I took off as fast as I could and took the longest way home, with the most turns and twists that I could. When I got home, I told my dad about the experience, and he was so angry that no one had answered my calls or believed me. He called the store manager the next day and complained. I was never contacted about his complaint, but from that night on, whenever I saw that guy, I would run to the bathroom, or if I couldn't get away, I would put out my lane closed sign and turn off my light so he couldn't get in my line. You always hear people talking about the people of Walmart as being trashy, but they never tell you that a select few are scary as hell.